people about like why this matters. It's like, you know, like the whole Phil Anselmo thing, it's just like, why are we even discussing this? Like, you know this is wrong, you know why this is wrong, like, you know, all my Jewish friends got it right away, like why?
I don't know if everyone...
Oh, sorry, yeah. So, Phil Anselmo was a singer of Pantera, and what band was he singing in?
Oh, Down.
With Down. So he was at a show, and he sig-hailed the audience and said, "White power." That's how he ended the show. And it was recorded, and if it wasn't recorded, he would have completely denied it and, you know, made everyone feel like they're crazy for remembering what happened. And then, you know, the next day he was like, yeah, you know, it was just we were drinking white wine, and so it was like we were joking about the white wine backstage, and that's really what it was about. And it was just like gross, like, especially with all the violence happening at Trump rallies, how dare you, like, and this is not the first time he's done something completely stupid. Like he gives really ignorant speech on, Lena was there for this, which was what, like 90?
Yeah, it was in 1992. I mean, he's had a very long history of making racially insensitive remarks. And the interesting thing is that in my book I write about the 1992 incident where he did this world tour, and Pantera was huge back then. So they were doing this North American tour, and at every stop, he would stop and do this long monologue about white pride, you know, and it was just insane. And if you check on YouTube, the video is up there. So I wrote about it in my book because it was a turning point for a lot of Black people my age who were into the grunge scene, who were into the metal scene in the early to mid 80s. A lot of people just stopped listening to him after the 92 incident. So 3 years ago, I was at a metal festival in Texas, and I met him, and I actually gave him a copy of my book. And I said, I wrote about you in chapter 4, and I said, just to let you know, you lost a lot of Black fans back in the day. And so he was like reticent, and he was, oh yeah, you know, and he was on drugs at the time. He still is.
I think he still is.
Yeah.
You know,
It's not an excuse.
no, but he was so nice to me when I met him, and I gave him my book, and I was giving him the side eye, like, you know, and so when it happened in January where he was caught doing the Sig Heil, it was very disappointing for me personally, because I wasn't saying that I thought he had changed, but I just thought, you know what, people are watching, and you know people are watching, and you know that there's this young generation of people of color who are following you, and don't disappoint them, and don't do this bullshit, but, you know, whatever. You know.
And so a similar incident, and I just want to build on this because it's quite interesting when we think about gender and performativity and feminism, is the band Mastodon. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with the band Mastodon, came out with a video called The Mother Lode, in which it showed Atlanta-based Black women dancers twerking. And it was a big deal because it's heavy metal, and it's not something you see in heavy metal videos where you see women twerking. And they got a lot of heat for that. But there was, and unfortunately Kristen Corbett's not here, she wrote an excellent paper on the Twerkgate incident in terms of the women that were in the video that were interviewed later on and were told, you know, they told people, like, actually, if you wanted to know anybody's opinion who counts, it's the women who were dancing, and we didn't feel like we were being objectified. Which is interesting because I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say in terms of women who perform in this way and still get objectified by an audience, but don't themselves feel like, you know, to them they feel like empowered. And in their interviews they said, you know what, I was dancing, I was having fun, no one was objectifying me. But then what's their influence on, you know, younger women who see this kind of video? And it happens in rock. I mean, the portrayal of women in videos, or just how, Chrissy, when you go to a show, that you're not, you know, why can't you look the way you want to look, right?
Yeah, I think the problem was a misunderstanding of the backlash. It wasn't because they were dancing and in bikinis or hot pants or whatever. It was like because there were a bunch of women of color who felt like Mastodon was a safe band for them, where they didn't have to confront like sexuality, like constantly having the sexual pressure on them that they have to do in every other music genre, you know? And so like Mastodon totally broke that for them, and that was the major complaint. But it also got weird because it was like so dismissive of their views, and you know, it was just like it was cool that those women felt empowered by what they were doing, but it just, to everyone else, it didn't make sense because the music just didn't go along with the dancing. And there, you know, there's been this like big conversation on cultural appropriation, and it was Mastodon was just like, I don't see it, I don't care, like that's not my problem, you know. It's like you live in Atlanta, which is like, you know, like the hub for this stuff, and like, you know, the hub of like such a huge like hip-hop culture. Like, you should know about these things and what the conversation is, and like why it's weird for people. Like it's kind of, it could have been cool, but it did not go with the song, and that was the major complaint about it. And so it was like they were dismissing all these girls who like had a reasonable complaint. And it was kind of like, well, you're stupid and you're sensitive, and it's like, no, I like your music and I like music, period, and this just didn't match. It didn't make sense, and it was offensive to me. And now, like, you know, I'm gonna be at a show and some idiot white guy's gonna ask me to twerk or something, you know, like, you know what I mean? Like that actually happens. Like, it might not happen in New York, but it happens all over the country, where it's like, now you have this added pressure of like, well, this is the song you twerk to, and you're like, you know, the Latin girl at the show, the black girl at the show.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think one of the issues for me was that I know, like, for my book I interviewed black women metal, hardcore, and punk musicians who are not seen as legitimate players. So the first time you see black women in a heavy metal video, they're prone, you know? They're twerking, and they are perpetrating a stereotype about the over-sexualization of black women in the strip clubs in Atlanta. So the first image you see of a black woman in a heavy metal video, she's got her ass out. So what does that do with the legitimacy of a black woman guitarist, a heavy metal drummer, a heavy metal vocalist, if the first image you see of a black woman in a heavy metal video by a very popular band is her bent over? Right? So that was it for me in terms of, it was just a bad decision. And I think that you're right, the band did not, it's just the music.
The aesthetics.
The aesthetics didn't match the music, but it also perpetrated a lot of gender, racialized gender stereotypes about black women that had no bearing on the song. It just, the whole thing was wrong. And it was funny because Kristen, I do wish she was here, because her article, her journal, her academic article on this was amazing. And she interviewed me for it, and I got a message on my Facebook page from a young black woman who had read the article, and she was really angry at me. Because she was like, I read what you said in that article, and how dare you, black women can do whatever, and that was a great video, and how dare you insult Mastodon, and she got really upset with me. And I'm just like, fuck you. You know, like, we all have our,
and then it becomes tokenism, you know.
Yeah, it was
one
like,
black
you
woman
should be
speaks
grateful.
for.
Yeah, it's like, you know, you should be grateful that there was a woman of color in this video. I said, not with her ass to the camera. And I said,
aren't you members of Mastodon people of color?
No, they're 4 white guys from Atlanta. Which is
okay.
also a big problem. Yeah, that's the problem. It's like,
Yeah.
and you know, they're cool. We have some mutual friends.
And it's like just a hard conversation too, because it's like if I was at a point in my life where I was like dancing for work, or like doing work that has to do with being sexy and presenting myself, and I was never dancing, I was doing other stuff, but like dancing was like an option if it felt comfortable. And if it was like dance for a bunch of money in this metal video, it's like, you know, to somebody who's a dancer, it's like, yeah, like let's do it. So yeah, it's just hard to like see, because then maybe the dancer, when taking that job, isn't thinking like, what about all the young women who listen to metal because, or listen to this band because there isn't like an objectification of women. And I know I got into Green Day because they weren't doing what a lot of the like Latin hip hop that I grew up around, like just the stuff that was popular at the time. It was like women were always dancing sexy, and women, you know, it was always like that's how like women were presented, even if they were performers, even if it was like their project. I just felt like I needed something that was different, and yeah, and I got into, and then the women punk bands that I got into, like Blats, and like there was sexuality, there was a conversation on sexuality, and there was even like performative femme sexuality with a lot of like older punk bands that had women in them and were talking about, you know, like Bikini Kill and Riot Girl bands, and like there was a conversation about sex work and femme identity and all this stuff, but it was like a constructive conversation, you know, it wasn't, or it was like, I don't know, I just felt like like punk became kind of like a super, like idealized utopia for me, in my head, it wasn't in real life, where like, all these things have to be addressed. And to add on to what we were saying before about, because you prefaced like the conversation about politics and metal with saying that punk is inherently political all the time, and it is, but there's definitely like so many different punk scenes, and there's the political one, and then there's the apolitical one that is like, you know, pop punk, for example, super apolitical, to the point where it's, and then there's like other scenes that are political as far as talking about class, or in ska talking about racism. Like that is a huge conversation in the ska community, but there's no feminism. And if you start talking about gender, like you gotta go, because there's no room for that conversation at the ska show. And yeah, like that's what I think is the problem with politicized punk, is like even that is always to a fault. You know, how many times have I gone to like the queer show and felt so alienated as a Latina, and I felt like, am I like the only person who's thinking this way and talking this way, and like, you know, like just feeling awkward and terrible, and then going to the Latino punk show and being the only dyke there, or having like, it feeling like growing up in Miami, which was a Latino punk scene. And like, I think that there's so much punk in Latin America that like it never felt like a thing I couldn't have. It was a thing I got made fun of for in school, but it just felt like a thing I could have, because there was Latino punk scenes everywhere. But it was just hard to find like the feminism in the Latino punk scene. So yeah, it's like, it's always hard. We need each other.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about the specifics of these, and I'm actually really interested in hearing about them, but I do think about this stuff all the time, and I feel like we're talking about responsibility and accountability, and how we articulate that and expect that from our scene leaders or people who have visibility and authenticity. And that's a really big question, and I've been hanging on to something I wanted to say about authenticity for a while, and I think authenticity is what I'm trying to do, is to put women on pages of magazines and give them space online and give them space at shows, to have that visibility, authenticity, and ideally use that privilege very responsibly. And I don't know how we deal with irresponsible behavior, and I'm really intrigued in listening to how tight-knit the community sounds, and how quickly people are responding to each other and being held accountable, because the people I wish were more responsible in my world is the music industry as a whole, and I'm trying to dialogue with them through commerce, through you know, trying to threaten them through losing money, but also presenting them with a magazine and a media company that ideally they'll feel heat from, and that they'll see authenticity in, which you do, and that's already like, I feel very powerful, that authenticity that we're all bringing to the table. But the accountability and responsibility for people who have a lot of power, I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know.
Well, I think that with the Phil, the latest Phil debacle, one thing that was interesting was that for the first time is metal music publications actually were like, what the fuck? Because they all knew that this had been going on for over 20 years. And there was a number of publications, such as mostly UK, I think, for some strange reason. Like Metal Hammer did a huge piece on is there a problem with racism in metal? Or the title wasn't very great, but it was good. I was interviewed for it, and I mean the journalist did an amazing job and let us just talk. So there were publications that actually were like, okay, we've had enough with Phil. And they really, and I think that people actually started paying a bit more attention because the metal music publication industry tends to be very blind in terms of issues of race, sexism, misogyny, and trans-misogyny too. They tend to just be like, oh, that's heavy metal. It's part of the scene. So for them to take a stand on Phil, it was a real sea change. However, we still need, there's still individual journalists, some people, friends of mine, who did not want to touch it with a hot, with a 10-foot pole. They just didn't want to deal with it. So you're still having this weird cognitive dissonance in terms of music listening and what can be tolerated and what cannot be tolerated. But I did feel that I did see a little bit of improvement because there were publications that were like, okay, this is crazy, we have to put a stop to this.
And to follow up with that, there was like all this talk the day after the video came out. Like all these people were complaining, like, oh, all these blogs are just cashing in on this like hot topic, like this is just a thing to talk about, and they just want the clicks, and that's why all these magazines and blogs are writing about it. But in truth, for all those blogs and magazines to write about it, they probably lost a lot of money because he's so connected to the music industry and like all these publicists, and I'm sure they're still trying to recover in some way from that. And so like it was kind of cool to see that everyone went hard on it, because I know that on the backside of that they probably got burned, even though it's like, well, they got a lot of clicks for it. Like the clicks don't matter. It's like the relationships you build for 20 years trying to build a publication, that's what matters. And if you burn a bridge with someone because you called someone out for sig killing, like, you gotta weigh that out.
Yeah. Passing down the water. So I wanted to sort of change tracks and have room for questions in a few minutes. But so over the past weekend, I was involved in a symposium that Lena organized called Women Clap Back in the Music and the Arts. And a question came up there that I think was great to sort of see what these women here have to say. And it was about payment in the industry in terms of freelance work or just trying to like, it's great that you women here are existing, period, and, challenging the status quo, but in terms of, advice that you might have for younger women starting out in the arts, how do you navigate that tricky field of, getting paid at the same rate as a man? Sure.
I don't even know.
Or is it just
I
complicated?
freelance because I don't like that constant tug of war to be taken seriously. I'm a freelance illustrator. With my music, I don't really have that experience as much because punk is weird and we're like dinosaurs. But as far as freelancing, that's been like my primary work for a very long time, since 2004. And what I've noticed is just my inability to get work. Something that was brought up at the Clapback talk was Beyonce's Lemonade, and how all these black women are being hired now to write about this, and like and that's totally my life, where all my jobs are about my identity. Like it's always about gay people or Latin women, sometimes women, but they have to be women of color. As far as like who I'm illustrating, I've been hired to draw Margaret Cho like 5 times, and like it's just like stuff like that. And I'm always, or like a punk thing, but with punk it's like, I don't know. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that I feel like just getting the high-paying work has been difficult because it's like my identity and my like whatever, my portfolio, my voice, like, is about feminism and about queerness and about racism and about like talking about all these difficult things, and then also punk rock. and then, you know, and then I'm really loud. And then, you know, like I want to call people out on their shit. So people just, you know, they kind of caught on and they were like, let's not hire her, she's difficult. And I was getting some fancy freelance jobs when I was starting out, but I think that it was between my demands as an artist and like me wanting to include my voice in my jobs, and then the fact that I was doing this whole other thing, like writing graphic novels about abuse and about being Cuban American and all these things that are like niche topics. Like, people just kind of stopped hiring me, and like, unless if it's, you know, let's call the queer Juanita because we got a job now to draw, like, you know, a piece on Laverne Cox. Like, you know, it's like, and it's fine. I'm like, great. I would rather draw Laverne Cox than Tom Cruise, you know. But like, it definitely took me a very long time. It's been about like 12, 15 years of freelancing and just realizing like I would rather be a professor or do some kind of like educational speaking thing. I do a lot of lectures, I do a lot of workshops, and as far as like paying the bills, like that's what I want to do, because the like hustle, while like the hustle for your voice and your art, while like challenging sexism and racism and homophobia and all these things in the illustration industry, it's just like not worth it for me anymore time-wise, because I have better things to do, you know? And like, but I really love seeing other women do it, you know? Like I feel there's a lot of illustrators and art out there, and you know, you should keep doing photography. Everybody should keep doing their thing and not take it as like, not take what I'm saying as like, it sucks out there, just don't do it. It's just that I'm sensitive. I don't know if any of y'all are into astrology, but my moon's in Cancer, and like everything else is in Gemini, so it's fine. But like I'm just very sensitive about my art and what I'm doing with my hands and my voice and my mind, and like sometimes it becomes like too much, and if I'm there, every job makes me cry. Like I think it's like maybe find a new job, you know?
To add to that, in the photo industry, there's this company that I know of that told my boss at the time that he would never hire a girl, and he said girl, he didn't even say woman, because you know he's hiring like 7-year-olds, that he would never hire a girl because they're too emotional.
That's right.
And I feel like that is true. I feel like a lot of people feel like, oh, she has too many feelings, especially like if you know, there's like a hot topic and I'll like discuss like, yeah, I'm actually like not white and I care about this. You know, I feel like people are like, oh, maybe, you know, she might call me out for something, or she's too sensitive or too emotional. And I feel like that's a problem for a lot of women getting any kind of job, you know. It's just that like, they're not like this guy and they don't say that outright, that I wouldn't hire her because she's emotional.
And I think they say emotional, but they mean like, not like she's gonna stand up for.
Yeah. She's gonna stand up for her rights if I say something stupid, or you know, like as if like men are already emotional, or like don't show up late to work, or don't have, you know, problems at home.
Yeah, I think the problem is like doing this type of work. Like for me, it's like, yeah, I write about metal, but I also write about race, ethnicity, and gender. And there is an issue with me being tokenized. Especially after my book came out, is that I was asked to do all these black people in rock, black people in metal, black women in rock, black women in metal, which in some ways it served me, was okay in order to promote my book, but a lot of the time they want you to do it for free. So their whole thing was, we're doing you a favor by asking you to write a 1,000-word piece on the topic that your book is about, but when it came down to it, you know, you're not expected to get paid. Because they think they're doing you a favor. So I think that also in terms of like my male colleagues, I have no idea if there's a wage discrepancy between what I get paid for a piece that they do, just simply because of the way how the freelance music world works, where usually it's a flat rate. I do know, like in some certain situations, that if you have a name like Robert Christgau or Grill Marcus, or Ann Powers, you will get paid more than, you know, somebody who doesn't have that name as a music critic. I teach a class on music criticism at the New School, and so I'm having all these conversations with my students about being very careful about writing for online publications right now, because I don't really care, but Vice magazine, and sometimes if you're writing for Vice, the problem is that they basically are ruling the media right now in terms of, it's great for young New York journalists to write for Vice, but the pay is shit, right? So you have to watch these publications that are saying, you can write for and get a byline, but you're gonna pay the price by not getting what you should be getting for your piece. So I think that is something that regardless of gender or ethnicity, you have to be very careful about the work that you're putting into your piece. Pay attention to where your piece lands in terms of what publication you want it to be published in, but you need to look at that rate and just figure out your time and say, if I'm doing a reported piece that's gonna take me 3 days to write, why are you only paying me $75? There's other publications that you can go to that will pay you more. So just be very careful. Don't be romanticized over a byline, because I think that that's a massive issue for journalists, and I think for women journalists too. Think about think pieces, like I'll use XO Jane as an example, who, if you want confessionals or if they want think pieces, like, you know, my vagina is purple today, what happened? You know, you're selling your soul and you're getting paid shitty for it. So I just think critically about your reputation, what you want to achieve as a journalist, and do your homework accordingly as to what publications fit your politics, fit your sensibilities, and fit your rate. When you do start off, you're not going to be paid a lot of money. I wrote for 3 years for free on purpose because I needed to build my portfolio. But after the 3rd year, I was like, fuck that, I got rent. That was done. You know, but I had to build my portfolio, so I was willing to do that. But these days, you know, you're not going to be paid very much when you first start out, but you still have to be very shrewd in terms of doing your homework and trying to find the best rate that you can.
And I'm on the opposite end of all of that, because I'm actually a magazine. So, and when I started, the goals I had and the people that were with me we were all in the same boat. And now 6.5 years in, the situation looks different, because we look enormous, but our budget is not enormous. So I could see TomTom becoming part of the problem, or I could see all of us kind of working together, like what you just suggested, where you don't take a job, would just narrow the amount of people willing to work for free. This gift economy is still around. It exists. I'm a part of it still, even though I work all the time on TomTom. I do a lot of the work within TomTom for free. So I think, and I've had this conversation with artists and musician friends of mine, like, what is this gift economy who is it serving? And I still do feel it is serving us in a way, because my options are work with people for very little money, or find a much larger commercial, or 5 commercial groups to work with, and then I've sold out like Green Day did, potentially. And another option is find investors. So I'm on the exact opposite end here, where I have, I don't know, several hundred freelancers working with me to make TomTom possible. And in 2009, while we were starting, that was one thing. Now it's 2016, and we're distributed all over the world, and everyone thinks this is like a cash cow, and I want a piece of it, but it's not like that. And I could sit here and tell you guys about that, but I think you can just imagine it. And I recently read something by Arianna Huffington, where she's, you know, no one on the Huffington Post blog team is getting paid. So we are digging our own graves when we work for free, and I'm part of that. So I don't exactly know how to end that, but what you were suggesting makes a lot of sense. Like, work for free for a while, get your feet wet, be sure your knives are sharpened and you're good at what you do, and then start asking for money for it, and don't take free jobs. That's my advice, though I don't practice it really well. And again, I'm on the other end, and it's very, very difficult, and I'm full of pressure now, deciding what to do. Fold a company because you can't pay all the incredible people who deserve the money. the way they deserve to be paid, or be more selective, which is something I'm thinking about, or partner with much bigger companies and do the sellout move. So I'm just presenting this side of it for you guys too, because I'm not doing freelance work anymore, but anyways, it very much was, so there's that.
Thank you for that.
So one thing, I actually asked a question, and it's funny because I asked it and everyone answered it different than I thought they would, because I was asking about transparency within the freelance community. So like, if Lena gets a gig writing for something, and let's say I'm a writer even though I'm not, be like, how much did you get for that? Which is kind of a hard thing to answer because it's like her experience is very different than mine, but also like having a little bit of transparency among each other could help like make sure that everyone is getting paid something, you know?
I agree, but you know what, I'm a little, like, you're my friend.
Right.
So if you asked me, I would tell you. But in some ways, I feel like I just helped somebody get a gig a week ago. And the pay, I love this publication. I've written for them for a number of years. They're a nonprofit, but the pay is terrible. But I do things for them because I have a relationship with them. And so I got a friend of mine, I got an assignment at this publication. And she emailed me and she goes, I asked about the rate and she goes, is this all it is? Like, and I felt bad because I should have told her from the get-go, look, the pay is terrible. So I just responded and I said, yeah, the pay is not great, but you always have room to negotiate. You know, you have to think about, because it was a reported piece, she was interviewing people. So I said, you know, write back and maybe they can up it a little bit when you tell them like how many people you're interviewing. But I don't tend to share, like, I don't know.
It's so hard, it's so personal. It's like how you're paying your rent every month.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I don't necessarily share it willingly unless I know you, like you're a colleague. I think that it's really up to you to negotiate with the editor one-on-one. And I think from my understanding generally, it's not going to vary too much unless, like, usually it's a flat rate for like a review or an interview or a feature. Each publication usually has a flat rate, and you can negotiate based on how much work you do on it, but I'm never really concerned that I'm getting paid $200 less than my male counterpart. I've never really had to deal with that.
Thank you. It's already almost 8:30, so, but we could probably talk forever. I just wanted to open the floor for questions for these ladies.
I'm gonna grab a mic.
And in between, thank you so much for speaking here today. Good night.
She's getting like.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. It's been really exciting listening to all of your different stories and hearing your experiences. And so my question is centered on kind of looking at these two different spaces that exist. One being one that's very woman-centric. I know a lot of you have discussed like Riot Girl and like creating Tom-Tom magazine. And then the kind of like mainstream rock and metal space being so deeply white male dominated. And so I was curious, how do you reconcile these two communities? Where do you find your own space to really exist and also thrive? And yeah, just like where do you see your place being? Do you kind of opt for one over the other? And
yes.
Yeah, how do you handle this?
Can I answer real quick with that one actually? I'm doing it through academia, so we're seeing more and more women of color and different ethnicities writing metal studies. And metal studies is something I'm very much behind.